You're with Julian on the Brown Note and an open letter to cookers, to the truck protesters, the anti-vaxxers, the anti-mandates. See, cookers is a term that I've recently come across. You can find it on Cookipedia to mean consists of people who believe a wide range of conspiracy theories, whether mainstream or fringe. And they've got this whole website developed to sort of list cooker events. I think one problem with that is that this isn't a group of people that are homogenized. It's a very disparate group of people, and this is kind of an open letter to them, to people that would have been in the truck protest in Canberra and the truck protests in Canada. I did a piece recently about how in conjunction with this, there is a rise of fascism that is global, particularly in the Western world, that it correlates to a lot of this stuff, but that's not this piece. Now, they're kind of most broadly named as anti-vax protests, but they have an incredibly wide range of beliefs in these groups. So there's the wellness crew, and the biggest surprise for a lot of us was when people that were into yoga got into the anti-vax movement, who got into sometimes supporting elements that were viewed as far right, which would appear to be the opposite of the whole thing. There's a hardline anti-vax movement. There's the anti-mandate movement who say they're not against vaccines. They're against this particular untested vaccine, which itself is a bit of an anomaly because they are, in fact, very tested, but they're not as tested as older vaccines. Or the notion of personal liberty and having, the notion of segregation. The harder line elements of this whole gang are continually evoking the Holocaust or the Civil Rights era, which is a supreme irony given that the elements and the hard right of this group would use the Holocaust or the civil rights, things that they would be diametrically opposed to. But like even the notion of segregation, it's like if people cling to a word, they've proved their whole point. I hate that kind of logic. Segregation, the idea is it's offensive because it recalls the civil rights movement. But segregation, if you want to boil it down to a word, exists in daily life. You can't go into a pub unless you're a certain age. You can't go into a cinema unless you've paid the price to get in. Some places you can go in if you're, of a certain persuasion, or if you're a male, or if you're a female. There is segregation. You can't go to school in an infant school if you're 45 years old. There are millions of versions of segregation. Just proving that word doesn't really mean anything. One of the problems that a lot of people from outside of these groups have had is that they are infested with far-right groups who have used this to their own ends. And that's not me dismissing the people that aren't far-right in these groups either. But we've also got right-wing politicians. Some of the laziest chancers in the political sphere have been hitching their bandwagon to this. We've got chancers, Pete Evans and people like that who are selling stuff and want, you to go to their Facebook page or YouTube page and that know that they can make money out of it. And we've got the right-wing shock media, the shock troops of the right-wing media who think that Fox News is too liberal. The extreme people on Fox News and the people that are, Rebel News and that kind of thing who are using this. And weirdly, also evangelical Christians in America who supported Trump are massively into this whole movement. It's a very disparate bunch. So to call them cookers when there's so many very, very different, often diametrically opposed people, but they're people who feel they have a need inside them to protest. And I'd say this to you. Where have you been the last 30 years of my life? A lot of us have been protesting the government and media this whole time. Look at this page. Look at my YouTube page. It is significantly critical of the mainstream media and of the government. You aren't doing this for the first time, and not everyone else that isn't with you is against doing those things. I protest the government and the media continually and have done since I was a teenager 30 years ago. So I would say this. There are a few things. One, be wary of who's standing next to you. It's always important. If they're exploiting what's going on for their own ends and you don't believe in those ends. 2, don't fall into a trap of not thinking critically about people that are on your side. Don't fall into this groupthink of everyone's against us, everyone hates us, so if you're on my side, your enemy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's not true if you don't believe in neo-Nazi groups or far-right groups and they're standing with you. So don't think that just because people are on your side that they are the same as you. 3, don't fall in the trap of doing the opposite and pigeonholing people that are against you. Because you might have a lot more in common with the people that are against those trucker protests or against the anti-vax people than you think. And you might have a lot less in common with the people that are standing next to you than you think. For instance, I've been put in this bracket a lot. I should switch off the mainstream news media and stop swallowing You can't believe that everyone that is against you is some sheep that swallows mainstream media. I haven't watched mainstream news media for nearly 20 years. I regularly post against how bad mainstream media is. There are many pieces on this channel, on this show, about how bad the mainstream media is. Just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I'm getting that from swallowing mainstream media. And just because I don't agree with your group, that doesn't mean that I am pro-government. I have a very long history online. I've got about 12 years of radio shows where you can see just how activist and against the government I am. And am regularly and pronounce that regularly. Not everyone that is against you is some pro-government lackey. You won't meet anyone less pro-government than me. You won't meet anyone less pro-mainstream media than me. And 4, understand what you're actually protesting against. If there are things that you believe in, make sure that they're not being assimilated with things that you are personally very much against. If you are a neo-Nazi and there's some fascism involved, bully for you. But maybe you aren't. Maybe you don't believe those view systems because they very much have hitched their bandwagon to you. And 5, recognise that even if I know it's easy when everyone's against you to think that, you're part of this special group and that everyone else is out to get you. But realise there's a lot of people out there, me included, that are very much in tune with a lot of the reasons that you're angry and have been expressing this for decades. This is why I said, where have you been all this time? One piece of advice I would have in my patronising, condescending piece is to say, be aware what alternative media is. So alternative news media is out there and has been for a very long time. What it isn't is Facebook and YouTube channels run by charlatans and chancers. It's not InfoWars. It's not the furthest right parts of Fox News. It's not Joe Rogan. I don't have a problem with Joe Rogan, but saying that you're alternative because you listen to the world's most publicly broadcast podcast on the world's biggest streaming service isn't alternative. What is alternative news media? Please seek it out. ZNet, Z-N-E-T, Z-D-E-N-T, Alternet, Democracy Now!, Firedog Lake, Truthdig, Common Dreams. There are a million ones out there that are genuine alternative media with real journalism, which have nothing to do with InfoWars or some Facebook rabbit hole. These people present a genuine, non-corporate, matrix-like version of the truth. They present a world where the lens of the matrix has been lifted. These are fantastic resources. ZNet, Z-D-E-N-T, is almost like a Wikipedia of alternative news media that collates all of these other things together. Any one of those is full of the most brilliant journalistic minds, philosophers, free thinkers that are the opposite of mainstream media. You look up anything like what's happening now in Ukraine and you will see a completely different picture. The alternative media is out there. It isn't these jokers like Rebel News. I've been protesting since I was, in my own way, since I was a teenager, what I think are the real problems of the world. And some of those would be, at the very top, economic neoliberalism, which came in the 1980s and has been promoted as our economic model ever since, and it has rapidly destroyed our way of life. It has reduced us to, not being able to afford, once being able to afford your own home on a working class salary, to not even being able to afford rent in a one-bedroom flat. Something went very, very wrong. It has infected every aspect of our life. It has made the cost of living and the standard of living slip every single year since it's been in force since the early 80s under Reagan and Thatcher. It has promoted corporate greed and the corporate agenda and the corporatization of the world. It has gone hand in hand with populist right-wing politics, which have done terrible damage, particularly to the Western world, with these chancellors in charge that really only survive because they benefit corporate interests, whereas what they actually do outside of that reduces our lives to crap. And hand in hand with both populist politicians and the corporate agenda through neoliberalism is the populist right-wing media. The damage that people like Fox News have done is incalculable. They have fermented this entire very angry world where truth is now no longer something of a baseline. People have their own version of it. And this all began kind of with their opposition when they were very pro-fossil fuels. They presented a version of science where science was left-wing. And that had a dramatic impact on the battle with climate change. We may not recover from that. Another thing that is really important is our population is completely unsustainable. Our population growth is something that no politician will touch. It's a very important thing. Foreign policy, our American-led post-World War II foreign policy is something that I've always opposed. I think that virtually every time we've gone into bat in wars, it's been both unnecessary and against populist socialist policies, which are often for the benefit of the people, in the service of often dictators. And virtually every war that we've been involved with, from Vietnam to the Middle Eastern wars, has been a complete disaster for fabricated reasons and has had a disastrous effect on the world. Anti-science rhetoric as well. That's been promoted. It began with kind of the evangelical Christian movement and Charles Darwin, but in the modern era, it's the notion that one scientist that is telling you what you want to hear is better than 10,000 that are telling you something you don't, particularly if you want to sell more oil. The intrusion of religion into our lives and into our politics, as we're seeing in Australia a lot in the modern era. Human rights as well, still not something that the amount of people that are in slavery around the world, particularly women in sexual slavery, and the populist right-wing politicians eroding well-won civil rights in order to promote division agendas when it comes to things like race or sexuality or women's rights, those things. And science should never be your target. Science has been painted as something that is political. If you think that science is political, you don't understand what science is. Science is a large group of people weighing the available evidence and coming to a conclusion that is broadly agreed. Science isn't saying I'm right. Science is saying 10,000, the most of this 10,000 scientists, based on this evidence, have come to a majority consensus that is our best guess as humanity in which direction to proceed. It is not one person saying you're wrong or right. Science is, 70, 80% of that 10,000 scientists reviewing the same evidence and coming to broadly the same answer, which will change when evidence is added or subtracted from that mix. It isn't a finite truth. It's our best guess. Science is not a minority of scientists existing in a bubble saying we're right. If you think that one scientist out of 1,000 is right and the others are wrong, that isn't science. You're doing science wrong. Science doesn't have to get it right 100% and that be permanent. It adjusts according to what evidence we have, how that evidence is processed, and who is looking at that evidence. But it isn't down to an individual on a YouTube page. So I think it's really important that you guys call out the charlatans in your ranks. Don't let them police either your views or your access to information, or how that information is framed to you. I'm protesting too, but I'm not standing next to our very worst. I mean, look at the politicians that are supporting this movement. Pauline Hanson, Cory Bernardi, Craig Kelly and George Christensen. 4 of the biggest self-promoters in Australia are supporting this freedom fighter movement, yet they have spent virtually their whole political lives voting with the government or being literally part of that government. Even like Trump, these are the establishment. They're not your revolutionaries. They're not your Che Guevaras. They are using you and they are exploiting you. And they have been voting with that government they claim so loudly to oppose. And that government they claim so loudly to oppose is not able to canvass the kind of votes that they are seeking, but they know that those people on that side of politics are on their side. They just can't in polite circles say so. So use all of this energy for good, but look at the other protest movements out there, look at the other news media out there, and don't just believe that because everyone is attacking you that you need to stand with everyone in your group.